It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. How does your team act in the face of adversity? I guess that's a good question, and I think it's a good time for us to reassess or take a look at Scrum Team Maturity and how teams behave, right? So, there's a lot of bad press going on about why teams misbehave. I've seen so many articles about teams are misguided, or product owners aren't doing their jobs, or scrum masters need to do better, or different things are happening. But the truth is, scrum processes are bound to fail if teams are not disciplined about the process or not technically mature enough to actually deliver the work they committed to during a sprint. Now, when I say mature, I'm talking about maturity in their agile, selection. This is why Scrum probably works best with teams comprising of at least people who are at a similar maturity level. Um, when I say maturity level, I mean not necessarily age, but of course that they all have similar agile experience, that they all have been doing this for a little while, and that they've learned how to work together, that they've made it through the Tupman model: forming, storming, norming, performing. Scrum is not a process, but it's a framework. And I think that if you consider that it's a product management and development framework, it'll be better to start measuring effectiveness of the outcome of each sprint as opposed to the output that gets delivered. I think the key is to figure out how much end user value is being delivered or added to the product each and every sprint. Then you can let the team figure out what they need to measure themselves on in order to improve that value. So it all comes down to maturity. And I think that when you start measuring maturity, there's a few KPIs you can take a look at to help you figure it out. There's no real science to this. There's no one size fits all, red pill, blue pill approach. But I think that one metric you can look for, one indicator you can look for, is how well the team understands velocity. Do they truly understand story points? Are they still using time based estimates? What level of maturity do they have when they start talking about how they estimate work? Are they looking at complexity? Are they looking at severity? Are they looking at urgency? Do they understand stories and make sure they're broken down well enough to be consumed in a sprint? Are they focused on refinement? So I'll tell you, velocity is a good way to tell. If the velocity has a little bit of an ebb and flow but remains generally consistent, and you see that the team clearly understands the scope of work that they're trying to do, that's usually a good indicator that things are going well. All right, what about the relationships within the team? So sometimes there's awkward relationships between, I don't know, the lead engineer and the development team, or the lead engineer and the product owner, or the product owner and the scrum master. I've just seen some awkwardness. And I think that if you start looking at how people get along and why people get along, and how about this, if people get along, it will give you a better and more clear picture of what should be happening within the team with regard to relationships. If you can see the team that's behaving well, that they get along well, and that they're actually being productive, then yeah, leave them alone. Don't bug them. But if you got a team that's struggling a little bit or trying to find their way, one good thing you can do is try to find team building exercises to help that team get over what issue it might be so that they can perform better. Speaking of getting over issues, another way that you can take a look at the team is to hold meaningful retrospectives. I mean, there are a lot of companies that hold retrospectives, but there's a difference between holding a retrospective and holding a really meaningful retrospective. A meaningful retrospective will not only focus on incremental improvements for the team, but it'll help them sort through some other items that they need to have discussion on. Whether it's simple things like what went well and what didn't go well, or it's more complex things about, let's visit together and figure this out, right? It's just, even if they have to include external things or figure out how they're going to solve problems, the retrospective should be a powerful place where opinions matter and where people can communicate and talk to one another. And I think that sometimes we don't look at the retrospective as a way of measuring efficacy of how a team's behavior is impacting their performance. All right, next one. Only measure what matters. And what gets measured is what makes a difference, right? Rely on metrics for what they really are. If they are doing things that are effective and impactful, keep on doing them. If the metrics aren't providing you with anything effective or anything valuable, stop tracking that metric. I always talk about the difference between outcome and output, and I often say that sometimes outcome is harder to measure than output, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You need to make sure that you understand what metrics you should use. If you're focused on burn down charts, then you're focusing on output because you're doing everything based on time. If you're focused on outcome, you can focus on burn up charts. Now, cones of uncertainty, air of predictability. You want to make sure that you can get to that point where the team can achieve predictability seamlessly without struggle, right? Okay. Another KPI would be, how does the team handle crisis? So, interestingly enough, I've seen more and more teams recently being micromanaged, where there's some leader, VP, director, senior level director that wants to control and or talk about how they can impact an organization with or how they can impact so let's back up for a second. I think that when managers start to micromanage, they just want to get control. That's the easiest way to put it. And I think that it breaks down trust, and a team is just not going to function correctly. So I want to make certain that when we talk about, frequency that managers attend meetings, or how often leadership is checking in, or why people aren't talking to each other on a team, it's important for us to get our head around all those things, that we can do an Ishikawa diagram or do a why how ladder or a five whys and figure out what's going on so that we can help the team improve. But one of the things that I've noticed is that if the team maturity level is low, they often mishandle crisis. They aren't measuring things that matter. They're focused on output over outcome when they should be focused on outcome and impact. They're not holding meaningful retrospectives that make sense. The relationships within the team are awful, and velocity is something that's all over the board. So I just gave you the reverse list of all those symptoms, but I can assure you that if you learn to focus on those things, you'll have better success with Agile. That's going to do it today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.